So what I'm talking about is the Imperial Image topic, which is essentially about the image of Augustus. And clearly in 40 minutes or so, I can't cover the whole syllabus. So what I'm going to do is focus on the whole syllabus, which is basically, the syllabus is about the presentation of Octavian and then Augustus in art, in monuments and in coins and in literature. And also in biography, and you can all see the syllabus, so that's there. So the focus is very much on, my focus today is going to be very much on the political background to the presentation. I think I'm going to have to swap that. Right. And the events and ideology, because since I can't go through the whole syllabus, what I want to do is to try and explain to you the issues and challenges were, what was going on, what the issues were in the establishment of the Principate of Augustus' rule, and how that affected his presentation of images. So in other words, rather than going through everything, we're going to look at what lies behind it, which gives you a key to interpreting it. And because time is limited, I'm going to stick more to the art and the monuments, and I'm not really going to cover the poetry because we can't do everything. And what I'm going to do for the lecture is essentially I'm going to focus on some of the stuff down to 27 BC, and then when we have the workshop afterwards, we'll look a bit more at some of the stuff that occurs after 27 BC or after 19 BC, okay? Right, now we'll move on to the actual sort of topic. And I wanted to start off by just explaining to you a bit about the Republic. What was the Roman Republic, and what therefore happened to it under Augustus? So the Republic is res publica, which is what the Romans call it. It means the public thing. I'm afraid I'm going to use some Latin because the Latin terms are often rather neater and better than other ones. It's the public thing, the state. The problem is that since 1789, it's come to mean republic to us in the sense of republican government, right? It didn't mean that to the Romans, it just meant a state, right? We'll see later how that happens. And therefore, and that's why I put these other words, yes, we'll come back to this in a moment. Now, the essence of the Republic, of the Roman, of what they saw as this, was that there were three elements to it. Firstly, that there were a number of popular assemblies. You don't need to know what they are or whatever, but the point is that the people did two things, were sovereign in two respects, that they were the only people who could really pass a law, elect a law, and they were the only people who could elect magistrates. So the people, meeting in various ways, did have some sovereignty. So elections, popular elections and voting were a key. Secondly, you had magistrates. You had what we call them officials or things like that. The Romans called them magistrates. All books about the Roman world called them magistrates. They're not magistrates in our sense, right? And the key ones, which you probably heard of, the two consuls who give their name to the year and basically run the state. And they and the praetors, the second most powerful people, have a rule because in some sense their post is religious, and so they have this thing called imperium, which is rule, and there's nothing you can do to them while they're in office. But what limits their power is that they can only hold office for 1 year, and then they're going to be replaced, so you can prosecute them when they've finished, but it's 1 year, and you're not really meant to hold the same office twice. Sometimes you're allowed to hold it again after 10 years. So basically you have one shot at being the top man, the consul, and for a year you're all powerful. But then that's it, okay? And it's the same with praetors. Junior magistrates don't have imperium, they have potestas, they have power. The third element in the Roman Republic is the Senate, about which people, there are lots of pictures. Any film has the Roman Senate's meeting, normally in something looking like a municipal lavatory. And they are mostly ex-magistrates. I'm not interested in going into the history of the Senate. They are people, and they are there for life. So it's like a club of people who have been aedile, quaestor, praetor, consul, and they actually have no power. Lots of books will tell you they have a power, but they don't. All they can do is advise, and that is why anything they decide is called the Senatus Consultum, advice of the Senate. And they, by tradition, because they're a powerful club, and when you've been consul, you're going to go back in it, on the whole, they're allowed to tell the consul how much money they can spend, how many troops they can have, to deal with things. But they do it by tradition, not by right. Okay? All they can do is give advice. The only power they have is religious, to decide what to do if there is a bad omen or something like that. Okay, and those are the three elements. And so you see the Republic, and there's no constitution. The Republic's a bit of a mess. But you get the principles. The principles are that the people vote and the people elect. The principles are that the magistrates are all powerful when they're in office, but they're there for 1 year and that's it, and that's you go. The principle is that the Senate advises people and people take the advice of the Senate, but it's not a rule. And that's how the thing works. It's something that evolves and it works by tradition. There are some laws, rules about when you can be consul and so on, but essentially it's a bundle of traditions. And it's kept going by people sticking to the traditions and respecting them and so on. There's very little sanction, right? There's no police force, no public prosecutor. Now, what can then happen is, what if a group of people start, a consul decides that he wants to get re-elected consul, illegally, but does get elected consul, like people like Maris do, or a group of people start dominating the Senate. The Romans had a word for that. That's dominatio, domination, right? And that's when the Republic starts going wrong, is when you have something called dominatio. And you claim this if, for example, someone starts becoming too populist and the people keep on voting him special powers. That's dominatio. If a group of people start controlling elections, that's dominatio. And since you can't, the res publica means the state, the opposite to that, you can't say, oh, we need to go back to the res publica, because dominatio is just the res publica under dominatio. They begin to use the word libertas. And the idea that, and so for a Roman, if you're going to say republic in our sense of a political republic, you say libertas, freedom, the freedom of the people to vote, the freedom of individuals to compete. Okay? Right, that's the Roman Republic in, what was it, 5 minutes, 10 minutes? Do you think, is that tolerably clear? Do I need to explain anything more? Right, I hope now we can speed up a little bit. Right, and what you've got on the handout, and I put here, are the key events in the rise of Augustus. And, how am I doing for time? And one of the things you have to note and you have to get straight and teach your students at some stage is his confusing changes of name. He's born in 63 BC, the year that Cicero is consul, and he's born Gaius Octavius. Gaius is his first name, Octavius is his family name. Okay? In 44 BC, Julius Caesar is assassinated, and it's often said he adopted Octavian. Well, he didn't adopt him. He left him as heir if he took his name. So it's actually Octavian who decides he will take Julius Caesar's name, and therefore, from 44, he is called Gaius Julius Caesar. And Dio and all the ancient writers refer to him largely then as Caesar, because that's who he was to them, right? It's a bit confusing, so we tend to call him Octavian, which is, if you're adopted, you might bung your previous name in adjectival form on the end. He didn't, but all right, that's why we call him Octavian. And then in 27 BC, just to finish the name thing, the Senate give him the title Augustus, and after that he is mainly known as Caesar Augustus. So basically he is, by convention, we call him Octavian down to 27 BC, and we call him Augustus from 27 BC onwards. Okay? Is that okay? Right, good. Because otherwise it does get a bit confusing when you read things. Okay. In 42 to 33 BC, for 10 years, 2 periods of 5 years, he is elected by the people, a special law that he, Mark Antony, and a guy called Lepidus are voted powers as 3 men, triumvirs, we then say, that just means 3 men, to organise the Republic. And basically that's a dictatorship of three men. And if you were going to argue about it, you'd say, this is okay because it's voted by the people. It's just a special command, okay? It's for a fixed term, and then it will stop, except it doesn't stop, it's renewed. If you don't like these guys, you'd say it's dominatio. And it is, it's a dominatio. It is three people having an untraditional form of popular power voted to them by the people to legitimize their dominatio. It's a tyranny, okay? And what happens is gradually, of course, we didn't go into the details, that Octavian, Lepidus is just, he's a bit of a loser, and he falls out of the picture, and you're left with Octavian and Antony. And they eventually, they start having little civil wars, and eventually they have a big civil war, which ends with the Battle of Actium, the Sea Battle of Actium, in which Antony and Cleopatra's fleet, for reasons we never really understand, sort of don't engage and run off. And then Octavian's forces capture Alexandria, and that is really the key thing. In August 30 BC, Alexandria is captured. Antony and Cleopatra, you all know, commit suicide, right? And then you can see the position then is that Octavian is, in effect, he is still triumvir. In fact, his powers have long expired. That he and Mark Antony are just going on as triumvirs, even though the powers expired. It's a dominatio, and now he's the only one, and he is acting as a triumvir, and the law's expired. He's got rid of one of his colleagues. He's forced another to commit suicide. This is totally a dominatio. Okay, it's not good. Furthermore, because he's run out of real powers, he starts getting himself elected consul every year to bolster his position. And you can see there's a big problem with that, because you're only meant to be consul once, or at best once every 10 years. So when you see he is being elected consul, presumably it's fixed, must be fixed, every year, year after year after year, and the other consul is always one of his supporters, that you can see this is a dominatio, right? And this is the language you need to be thinking about, dominatio, libertas, and so on, and this is what is behind it. And one of the main things that I should have said about the triumvirate is that one of the ways they had particularly become unpopular with the elite, the upper classes of Rome and Italy, was because they had a lot of veteran soldiers who they wanted to settle. And so they carried out proscriptions. And that is, you put up a list of your political enemies and declare them to be public enemies. They can be killed legally. You take their land and give it to your troops. And victims of the main proscription, which is 43 BC, most famous one is probably Cicero, whose hands are cut off and put up on in the Forum because he wrote speeches against Antony. But it's one of the worst disasters ever suffered by the Roman elite, the proscriptions under the triumvirs. So the triumvirs are very unpopular. By 30 BC, there's only one of them left. And he is showing, worse than that, he is showing signs that of wanting to establish some form of monarchic rule in Rome. Now, this had gone back, from the days of Sulla onwards. Romans had known the Greek East, where there are lots of kings of various types, and they had admired their palaces, their courts and so on, and they'd started imitating this a bit. And Caesar, in particular, Julius Caesar I'm talking about, it was one of the reasons he's assassinated is because people came to believe that he did want to introduce some sort of monarchy to Rome. And in 30 BC, as I'll try and explain now, a lot of Romans will have thought that this is what the new Caesar, his nephew who had taken on his mantle, that this was what he was up to. So now we're going to start reading some monuments. And the first thing I do is just point out a bit about the Forum. Rome had always been a messy city. Romans, like the Spartans, they said, we don't do big buildings, nice streets, things like that. We're tough, we're peasants, And so Rome had been a mess. And it's Pompey and Julius Caesar who first start turning it into something that looks like a Mediterranean city, with decent buildings, marble and things like this. And we're looking here at the Roman Forum from up on the Palatine Hill. It's okay if I walk? Yeah, that's fine. And if you look down on it, one of the things you'll see here is this is basically it's the Forum as it by the end of the Imperial period. But that thing there is a recreation of the new Senate house built by Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar also built a new forum off the side. So he starts messing about with the forum. And this new forum off to the side has a temple in it to Venus the Genetrix. And Venus Genetrix means Venus the begetter. Why might Venus be called the begetter in Rome? Yes, you've jumped actually the more specific thing. The Romans generally believed that they were descended from Mars and Venus. So Venus is the begetter of the Roman race. But Julius Caesar, picked up by Octavian, began to claim that he was descended personally from Venus. So you can see that this is a bit tricky. If you have a temple to Venus the begetter, you can say, oh, this is all right, it's Republican, it's to the goddess of the Roman state. But it's one of the things that Hellenistic kings do. They link themselves to a deity and claim a personal link and support with that deity. And what is worse is that apparently Caesar put statues of himself and Cleopatra in there as if they were gods associated with Venus. And that's where these things start. You see that the forum, instead of being like the center of libertas, starts becoming more like a Hellenistic capital where you go into the forum and there's the forum. There's a Julius Caesar forum now next to it. The Senate House is now called the Julian Senate House, and so on. You can begin to see how it's not really quite looking Republican anymore. Okay, and that gets worse. In 42 BC, the Senate decided to deify Julius Caesar, first person to be at Rome to be deified posthumously. In the Greek world, you would sometimes treat a founder as a god, and so this isn't. It's pretty unusual at Rome. But two things are pretty striking. One is that Octavian then decides to put up a temple to the god Julius in the forum, and he puts it, right, we're now looking the other way to the way we were looking before. But you can see it's right in the middle of the forum. So now, if you're in what was the Roman forum, where the people would meet to vote, if you look one way, you've got the Julian Senate House and the Julian Forum. You look the other way, and you've got the temple of the god Caesar. Okay, and you can see that this is getting a bit different. The other thing that Octavian does is his proper name is Gaius Julius Caesar. And what you normally do in a Roman name, you add in your father's name. So you say Gaius Julius, and you might say son of Gaius, because his father was Gaius Caesar, right? Gaius, have I got that right? Yes, Gaius Julius, son of Gaius Julius. But if you look at item 1B on the handout, it's just an example of the gold coin we're going to come to. It just illustrates that what he does is he, instead of calling himself Caesar, son of Gaius, he calls himself Divi Filius, son of a god. And so you see, what has happened is that Julius Caesar has become a god with a temple in the forum. Now you might say he's dead, it's all right, you worship him as a god if you want, but his heir has called himself son of the god. Incidentally, some books will say deified one because Deus is not the same as Deus. There's a Latin word Deus, which is God, and Deus means divine. But when you say Deus, it's pretty clear that that's just a way of trying to get, be polite about it. He's Deus, he's deified. It does mean he's a god. It doesn't mean he's not a god, right? Some people try and say they don't believe he's really a god. No, they do. Deus has no, right, little footnote. Okay. Then there is the Mausoleum, so-called. This is what it looked like. Actually, it's in a worse state now because it's being restored. But anyway, and it's restored like this. I'm afraid your textbook for this course, like many books, gets this wrong. They say, oh, this is one of the reasons people support Octavian, not Mark Antony, because Mark Antony is going to be buried in Alexandria, and so Octavian builds himself this tomb in Rome, and it shows his loyalty to Rome. Right. Okay. What this is, you can see, we don't know quite what it was like. You can see what we've got is the brickwork, which has been adapted since, but it's fairly clear it was essentially a mound with a lot of earth and trees and so on. So it's basically a mound, an earth mound with some trees and a statue of Caesar, that is Octavian, on the top. Okay? And this is one reconstruction, doesn't really matter. And what its official name is, which we get in inscriptions, is the tomb of the Julii, the mound tomb of the Julii. So it's meant to be a dynastic tomb, and it's modelled really on the archaic tombs of the royal period in early Rome. So it is, you know, it's meant to look like an Italian noble tomb of an archaic sort, you know, like the time of Aeneas and so on. Why is it called the Mausoleum? It's called the Mausoleum because this is a nickname that the people of Rome invent for it. And Mausolus was a ruler, a tyrant of Halicarnassus in the 4th century BC, who built himself an enormous wedding cake tomb. Looked nothing like the mausoleum here. It was square. It had statues all the way around it. Somehow those statues have largely ended up in the storerooms of the British Museum, but that's another story. So you can't have called this the mausoleum because it looked like the tomb of Mausolus, because it didn't look anything like the tomb of Mausolus. What this nickname means is Mausolus is famous as being an extravagant tyrant. So the official name is, to Caesar, or to Augustus, this is his family tomb, and the people hate it because they see it as being a monarchic tomb. So the nickname for it is the exotic tyrant tomb. That's the best I could do. Or I could say the Gaddafi tomb, or the, you know, whatever, you know, leader of Asbert, and, you know, one of these stans who you get the point. That mausoleum is not a nice thing, that people didn't think it was good that he built this tomb. It's a symbol of being a tyrant, of dominati, of being monarchic. Okay, one other little thing. His house. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but he builds his, he acquires some land on the Palatine Hill, and he builds a house, and it's described in Suetonius as being a very modest house, but actually it's part of a huge complex. It's built near some huts, which the Romans had already decided were the huts of Romulus. So he's linking himself to Romulus. And down there is the Lupercal. That's where the wolf brought up Romulus and Remus. He builds a massive temple to Apollo there. He has a portico which he decorates with 200 statues stolen from Alexandria. There are Greek and Roman libraries. What does this look like? It's not a house, is it? It's what we call a palace. And why is a palace called a palace? Because after Augustus' house, which is on Palatium, means the Palatine Hill, and then it comes to mean palace because people say the Palatium, and they mean it's the monarchic capital, right? So you can see if you were someone in Rome in 30 BC, and that's what it would have looked like up from the Circus Maximus, more or less. And you can see it looks like a Hellenistic palace. It's a big complex. Might have a modest little living quarters, okay, but that's a palace. And perhaps the most famous building in Rome, you know this, the Pantheon. And what is the Pantheon? What does Pantheon mean, do you know? Yes, so it's a temple to all the gods. And it's built by Agrippa, and it didn't look like that when Agrippa built it. This is Hadrian's rebuilding of it, okay? But he left Agrippa's inscription on it. And Agrippa dedicates it in 27 BC. But what we know is that when he started building it in 30, it was called the Caesareum, in other words, the Temple of Caesar. And it was going to be a temple in which there was going to be a statue of Julius Caesar and of Venus and of Octavian. In other words, it was going to be public worship of Octavian as a god. And then in 27 BC, there's a sudden change of heart, and the statue of Octavian is brought outside and put outside in the portico, and it's called the Temple to all the gods instead. Okay? So, I think we are, and then just one last little thing, because it's in your syllabus, I just thought I'd mention the Calabtia Gate. And it's often said that Octavian represents himself as Pharaoh in Egypt and as king of Egypt. It's not, all I'm going to say quickly is it's not that simple. If you know anything about Egypt, and I don't know very much myself, the names of rulers are put in these things called cartouche. So his name is put in a cartouche. This gate, bizarrely, has still not been properly published, but a friend of mine who can read Egyptian, I can't, has told me what it says, and it says Caesar, and then this is a bit of a muddle here, Caesar, God, possibly son of a god or God, the Roman, and he regrants the lands to, so he's called Caesar the god, the Roman. He's not called Pharaoh. Right? So it's not entirely clear that anyway he knew what was going on in Upper Egypt. So just be a bit wary about saying he but what we can say is that if you were in Rome in 27 BC, or in 29 BC, he comes back to Rome, he has a triple triumph, 3 days of triumph to celebrate the end of the Civil War. What would you think of Octavian in 29 BC? Would you think he's the hero who's won the Civil War? No, you think he's a really unpleasant piece of work who has achieved power through a dominatio, the triumvirate, who has got rid of his two co-triumvirs, who has been increasingly presenting himself as if he is a divine monarch, and he's now coming back. And is this restoring the Republic? No, this is this is dominatio, this is monarchy. Okay. And when he comes back, there is then a bit of a change of plan, and we go into the so-called settlements. Now, the idea of there being settlements goes back to a German historian called Mommsen. And I just mention this because all the books, there's nothing you do. You can't get round it. You have to talk about there being 3 settlements, the settlements of 27, of 23, and 19. That's because Mommsen was a German senator, a historian, but also a politician, who lived through the unification of Germany in the 19th century, which was achieved by a series of progressive settlements between the Prussian monarchy and the Länder, the various German states. And so Mommsen immediately interpreted what Augustus, how he establishes the Principate, as if it were the unification of Germany, right? And that's why we're stuck with this idea of there being 3 settlements. And now, we can call them settlements, that doesn't matter. What I don't like, and what I'm going to try and persuade you not to believe, is that these are part of a plan of establishing the Principate, that they are progressive and they gradually think. What I want to suggest instead is that they are the result of a political battle, and they are signs of a political battle which ebbs and flows, and that affects the outcome, the imagery that we're going to see in the workshop. Okay? Any questions so far on how we've got to where we are? Amazing. Good. Right. Well, let's continue. So, this is why I want to bring in some of the text. Oh, yes. The other problem is that the Romans themselves, when they look back at this, they all pick 28 to 27 as being the beginning of the Principate. All Roman writers do, almost without exception. And it becomes a foundation myth. And this is quite important to understand, that when Romans, the trouble is all our sources, apart from the Res Gestae, are written later, and they all look back and say, oh, it all began in 28 to 7, which it didn't really, but you have to explain, that's your story. Why is the Principate? What is the Principate? What is it about? And they all say it's in this thing that in 28 to 27, the emperor is given these provinces. He is given a set of provinces. And that is what, for later Romans, defines the Principate. What we'll see is it's a bit different to that, but that's what you come to believe. And you have to realize there is a foundation myth. There's a limit to what you can say about Augustus because he created the Principate. If you criticize Augustus, you're criticizing the Principate. Okay? Right. Basically, if we look at some of the ancient views which I put on the handout, you'll see Augustus himself at the end of his Res Gestae sums it up as follows, and he's partly responsible for creating this. In my 6th and 7th consulships, that's 28 to 27 BC, after I had extinguished civil wars and through universal support had power over everything, I handed over the state from my power to the decision of the Roman Senate and people. Do you see what he's claiming there? This is written, this is being published at the end of his life in AD 14. He's summing up his whole political career at the end, and he's saying, what I did in 28 to 77 was I restored the Republic. And there are coins that say res publica restituta. He says, I gave the state back to the Senate and people. Yeah? So he's claiming to have restored it. And if we look, on the other hand, at what Dio says, and I've given you 2a and 2b on the handout, Dio, summing up the historical tradition, Firstly, under 29 BC, at the time of the triumph, what he says is, these were the deeds and experiences of the Romans under the monarchy, Basileia, that's Romulus to the Tarquins, the republic, which he calls in Greek the demokratia, and the power of the individuals, and by that he means Sulla, the triumvirs, Julius Caesar, right, the time of dominatio, over 725 years, that's since 754. After this, the Romans began once more to have rule by one man, to be accurate, although Caesar had planned to lay down arms and transferred affairs to the Senate and people. So Dio's view is that Octavian had thought of restoring the Republic, but didn't, and he instead established a monarchy. And when Dio comes to 27 BC, what he says to be, where he sums it all up, in this way, all the power of the people and of the Senate was transferred to Augustus, and from this time, rule by one man, to be accurate, was established. And it's very difficult not to think that Dio had known and read the Res Gestae, because what he is doing there is he's reversing precisely the claim made by Augustus in the Res Gestae. So you can see that everyone agrees 28 to 27 BC is the start of something important, and Augustus, at his deathbed, is claiming, I restored the Republic in 28 to 27 BC, and the Roman historical tradition is saying this is when the Principate began. Okay? And what we're going to be exploring a bit is, you can see, and this is the key thing, so I say it now so I don't forget to say it, I'm trying to explain to you the ambiguity that lies behind all the imagery. The claim, official, to have restored the Republic, the reality, which everyone knows, that you've set up a monarchy. And there's this unspoken ambiguity that drives all the imagery we're going to be looking at in the workshop. Okay? And part of this, just to remind you that the triumvirate as a dominatio, and was seen as such. And a few years ago, 2 gold coins surfaced. There are 2 copies. One's in the British Museum, one's in a private collection in Switzerland. It's not surprising. People said, are they fakes? No, it's just Roman gold coins are very rare because people melted them down. And what this coin shows, and I've given you the text on the handout, on the front it's got an image of Augustus, and it doesn't look anything like him. It looks like Julius Caesar. It looks like Caesar, right? So it's a Caesar image. And he describes himself as General Caesar, son of a god, consul for the 6th time. And on the back, there's a picture of him in a toga. We'll do some reading of images in part 2. He's wearing a toga. He's sitting on this funny bench, which is the bench of a magistrate with Imperium, and he's holding out scrolls from a collection of scrolls, and it says, Leges et Jura Populi Romani Restituit. He restored rules and law to the Roman people. So you can see he is actually claiming in 28 BC to have ended the dominatio. He's admitting, in effect, there had been a dominatio, and he is now restoring the normal operation of republican rules and so on. And something you have to remember is that, and I put some references on the handout, I think, to this, that, see, Suetonius says he twice considered restoring the Republic, first immediately after crushing Antony, in view of Antony's not infrequent accusations that it was he, that is Octavian, who was the obstacle to its restoration, and again 23 BC, when, exhausted by a chronic illness, he summoned the magistrates and Senate to his house. Enough survives of what was going on at that time for us to know that, faced with a civil war between Antony and Caesar, one of the things that had caused it was that Antony kept on saying, in 33 BC, when the triumvirate ends, I am going to restore the Republic. And everyone believed Antony. And most of the Senate, when the war broke out, went to join Antony because they believed he was going to restore the Republic. And they didn't believe that Octavian was going to restore it. And that's why most of them backed what turned out to be the wrong side. When Octavian comes back, he's master of the whole Roman world. He is so unpopular, he thinks he's going to establish a policy, but he has to back down. And what he does is he says, I'm going to restore the Republic. And he sort of legalizes his position by he gives up being triumvir, that he wasn't legally anyway, and instead he takes something that Pompey had. He takes a limited command. So this is like a mini triumvirate, except it's just him. He is given some big provinces, and so you can have 10 years, you can control those provinces. They've got most of the troops, they've got a lot of the money. So he is, safe. He's got a position, he's got power, but it's going to expire in 10 years' time. Meanwhile, civil affairs in Rome should now revert to the normal running of the consuls and the Senate and the people. And that's presumably the idea. So when you were there in 27 BC, you wouldn't have said, oh, this is the Principate. You'd have said, this is an immense climb down from being triumvirate. Instead of controlling everything, he's now got a limited control of certain provinces for a set period, and presumably, and he said he's going to restore the Republic, and presumably at the end of those 10 years, then he will retire and be a kind of honoured leading citizen and so on. Unfortunately, and that's when, in return for this big climb down, he's given various honours, including being called Augustus. Fortunately, it didn't quite like that, because what goes on, as we saw before, is he went on being elected consul, and that must have been the shock in August that year. What you'd assume, you can't hold two positions at once. You can't be proconsul, governor of a province, and consul. Sorry, I should have said when you're governor of a province, you're a proconsul, a consul, an extra consul, okay? And when he stood for election again, with a mate of his, and went on doing it year and year again, then you knew, no, Dominatio is back. He's only played with giving up, and then he's now trying to regain power, monopolising the consulship. Yes? It's quite complicated, but he must have been, it's a mixture of intimidation and organisation. The elections for consuls are done in an assembly, which is where the votes of the rich have far more weight, and they vote first. And so basically, if you get enough supporters, you start a bandwagon going, and then it becomes clear. And then there's the implicit threat if you stand against him. Probably he's elected unopposed every time, because no one dares stand against him and his mate. That's that.
And this attempt to neutralize him by giving him this tenure governorship only really makes the problem worse.
Well, yes, because I imagine that when the Senate voted him that, they assumed that come August, he would not stand for election as consul again, because he was now proconsul. He says, I'm going to restore the Republic. You give him a really big province for 10 years, so he's got power. He's not going to be in trouble, right? He's still very powerful in the state. Sorry? Yes. Yes, you're trying to give him a nice way out of, the choice of, like the choice of either you make yourself monarch or you get killed or prosecuted, right? So you give him a big power, and he seems happy with that. And then to your horror, he does, instead of stopping being consul, he continues being consul. And we can see that's the real problem, because then in 23 BC, after several years in which there are all kinds of crises and battles, and a lot of his friends die in various ways because he falls out with his friends, and there's a lot of pressure going on, he himself thinks he's going to die, and so he hastily decides he'll restore the Republic again. And then he doesn't die. But what he does do then is he resigns the consulship, because he knows that is what has been causing all the trouble, that he and his mate every year have been consul. That's Dominatio, it's Dominatio, and it means no other noble can be consul. So in 23 BC, he gives up the consulship, never to take it again. Instead, what he gets is his imperium, his proconsular power is made greater, so it's enhanced a bit. That just means so that he can't be told what to do by the consuls. So it's protecting that 10-year power he's already got. It's not a big issue. That's my point. It's not a big issue. And the other thing that he's given is the power of being a tribune. Now, in a lot of views, Syme and so on, going back to Mommsen, this is regarded as being a progression. So they say he gives up the consulship and instead he gets the brilliant power of being tribune. It's not a brilliant power. As tribune, you can pass laws through the people. In 18 BC, much later, Augustus passes all his laws, reforms, his moral reforms, using his tribunician power to propose these laws. 18 BC, mind you, so it's not in 23 BC, it's in 18 BC, after another big change. And it's only he does that legislation. The other thing that a tribune can do, famously, is to veto the actions of other magistrates. Does Augustus ever veto anything? No, never. Right? The tribunician power is an honour. It gives him the right to veto things if he wants to. So it's like having a defence. But you see, whereas the consulship is a big, powerful, it means you can raise armies, you can carry out trials, you run the Senate. The tribunician power is a defensive power. You can pass laws, yes, but he doesn't do that to 18 BC. You can veto things, and in fact he never does. So it's like having an honour. What is important about it is that you can see, again, you're not meant to be tribune year after year after year. So what they've devised is this cunning thing of saying, we will give you the power of a tribune. And we renew it annually. So you're not actually one of the 10 tribunes, you've just got an equal power to them. And that's a key step in moving towards how can you run a monarchy within a res publica, by abstracting power so that people, instead of having to be re-elected year after year, which is clearly wrong, they're just giving them a power. Then what happens, we're not going to go into the details, over the next few years, Augustus does what he never does any other time in his career, he plays to the people. He starts giving out free grain, he gives them loads of money, he goes off to the east and has this fake victory over Parthia. He just recovers some standards. You know, even Trump is doing worse with Iran, but I mean, and he comes back and he claims he's got this great victory and he's got a lot of popular support, and in a sense 19 BC is a coup d'etat. He carries out a coup d'etat and takes over Rome with popular support, and he gets himself voted a grant of the power of being a consul. And you see he's now got to where he wanted to be in 28 BC, but without it being the overt dominatio it was. That he now does have the consular power, and he has it indefinitely, but it's not by being consul. So he can claim, I've given the state back. The consuls are elected, the consuls run the state, the Senate advises, the people still vote laws, though the last laws, significant laws they ever vote, are in 18 BC, the laws proposed by him. After there is no vote, law passed by the people under independent, proposed independently after 27 BC. So, and that is, in a sense, so what I'm trying to show you is that the way that the Principate comes to power is the result of a struggle for power, that it's couched in this question of, are you restoring libertas or are you establishing dominatio? And that what comes out in the end is a bit of a compromise whereby you have, in a sense, gone back to the norms of the Republic, like annual elections of consuls and so on, but you have abstracted the powers that Augustus wanted and given them to him personally in a bundle, which means that he is in a position without any definition. He's not consul, he's not tribune, he's not even really a proconsul, but he has the power of a consul, the power of a proconsul, the power of a tribune, personally, and is able, therefore, to influence things. And of course, if you then say, well, how is he able to manage politics thereafter? He does it through influence, right? You don't have to do things by standing up and saying, I do this by this right. You stand up and you do things and you say it, and people don't argue. And in the rest of the empire, everyone treats him as, they just assume he's a ruler, in the provinces. This change, retrospectively, 27 BC is then seen as being the established, and he changes his faith. As the young Caesar or Octavian, he adopted an arrogant type young man statue, head type, and this is an example in the British Museum. It's a bronze one that was found in Meroe because the Nubians captured it from a Roman fort and then put it under the staircase of their main temple. So every time you entered their main temple, you were trampling on Augustus. You can see it's modelled on the statue of Alexander the Great, on the bust of Alexander the Great. Got similar things, the looking upwards, the quiff. Just to give you an idea of what Roman statues should look like, that's Pompey over there. Now Pompey, who's called the Great after Alexander the Great, he adopts Alexander's quiff. But people are always puzzled by Pompey's bust because it's so ugly. You say it's piggish. It really is not a nice face, is it? He was the most handsome man in Rome of his day, apparently. Right? What this means, in the Republic, you always portrayed yourself as ugly. Roman leaders were wrinkled, ugly, and so on. That was they're brutes. That's what Romans are like. This is an idealized Hellenistic monarch-type portrait, okay? What Augustus does from 27 BC is he changes to this image. And you can see It's going back a bit to, there's a more statesman-like look. He's kept the Alexander quiff, but you can see he hasn't quite gone back to the Republic, has he? Augustus, his image, is an idealised Hellenistic image. It's not quite a grumpy old jowly Roman image. The last thing I want to bring up is a passage of an author who isn't specified, a guy called Velleius Paterculus, who was an officer, military officer and a senator under Augustus Tiberius, and wrote a handy little 2-volume history of Rome for people who couldn't face the 142 books of Livy. And he writes, under Tiberius, he's been made praetor by Augustus. And it's just to see what he says about 28 to 27 BC. Civil wars, he says, were ended after 20 years. Foreign wars suppressed, peace restored, the frenzy of arms everywhere lulled to rest. Validity was restored to the laws, authority to the courts, and dignity to the Senate. Magisterial power was reduced to its former limits. In other words, magistrates had to stick to what their role was. The old traditional form of the res publica was restored. Agriculture returned to the fields, respect to religion, stability to mankind, and assured possession for each man of his individual property. And that's the view of the loyalists. And what I think that sums up is, how was Augustus able to achieve this political victory over the Senate? The answer is the thing that the books tend to forget. Who'd lost from this? If you went back to the Republic being restored, what's missing of the 3 elements that were there? The Senate, the magistrates, the people. The people. The people have been neutralised. There's no more, right, elections, you have a list, you vote for the people. If a vote is proposed, there are some laws passed, it's proposed by the 2 consuls. In other words, it's legislation down, or it's proposed by Augustus' tribune. No other tribune proposes things. The people have lost power. If you look at what Velleius says, restoring the Republic about, it's about dignity, religion, and so on. He doesn't say power. He nowhere says the Senate and magistrates run things. Doesn't mention that, because he knows they don't. Right? This is a limited monarchy. It's like 1688, which benefits the upper classes. Respect for religion, property rights. That's what Velleius ends up with. Why did the Senate agree to this thing? Because they never liked popular elections. Popular elections, popular voting, they lead to things like people proposing to divide land and give it to the poor, like the prescriptions. What they like is Augustus's deal. You give me these powers, I'll say we've restored the Republic, and I'll make sure that from now on the poor never vote, the poor never pass laws, the poor don't get your land, and that's the deal that the upper classes go for. Okay?